Hello and welcome to Fearless Journeys Thriving on Campus. I'm Steve. I'm winging it today as my co-host is a little sick today. We're here to explore ways college students can prioritize mental health, tackle challenges, and thrive both academically and personally. So today's episode is going to be all about transformative power of creativity and art for your mental health. And we'll explore how art therapy works. We're going to share some practical tips for getting started and see how creativity really does change lives. So to guide us through this colorful topic, we're here joined by Maya, great colleague of ours.
Hello.
Hello. Would you like to introduce something about yourself or let people know who you are?
My name is Maya. I am an art therapist and mental health therapist here at Lethbridge Polytechnic.
Awesome. And it's always like, do we call ourselves counselors or therapists?
Yes.
And it's one of those things. Is there a difference? What is the difference?
I don't think there is.
No?
Yeah. Not really.
Okay, so let's kind of hop into what we're talking about. So Can you explain what art therapy is and how it works?
Yeah. Art therapy is a counseling approach that uses art materials and the creative process, which is the art making, and the product, which is the artwork. So this is used to help address issues people come into counseling with. So we're still exploring thoughts and feelings, fostering awareness, and developing skills and strategies. And based on goals, reducing anxiety or increasing self-esteem as examples. So really same thing, but with the art. And so it can be very effective to view one's issues concretely on paper or in a sculpture.
That's interesting how you would kind of put what you're thinking onto then something that you're actually using your hands,
yes,
and texture and such, eh? And is it about creating beautiful art?
It is not about creating beautiful art. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And so it's not about those classic aesthetics of art that we are all used to. It is really an avenue of getting to the core of things, as we do in counseling, the feelings, again, the thoughts, and what is meaningful to the individual. Yeah.
So it's kind of like journaling, but instead of using words, you're using colors, shapes, other creative tools to kind of tell your story.
Sure, yeah. That's a helpful take on it, yeah. And like journaling, the person creating is making their own interpretation of their experience in a way that may feel more understandable to them, working out issues externally in a visual language. So for some people, it may be more effective than talk therapy. And also like journaling, it's an active process. There can be the use of metaphor, like you were saying, colors and shapes represent feelings, thoughts, experiences, and a ton more. So,
yeah, I find that when I started thinking about art therapy as a concept anyways, I thought, well, I'm not artistic. I can't do this, and I think I would struggle with, I want this to be perfect. Yeah, is that something that you face a lot?
I think that's sort of like art class mentality. Because as in art classes, we get graded on our artwork, which I totally disagree on.
Right.
But we do. That's just the way it is. And so I think we carry that with us. And so all of a sudden you may be in context of art therapy and you're still in that brain of, I have to do something spectacular, right? I have to do something perfect. But again, like I was saying, it's not for anybody else. It's not for anyone to judge or critique or witness in any way except for the person making the work. And then if you're working with an art therapist. And if those concerns about perfectionism come up, then that's a conversation. And with an art therapist, maybe they'll provide a particular directive to address your concern about perfectionism in some type of other artwork.
Right.
So it can just keep going on and on.
Yeah. And it's just kind of like embracing imperfection sometimes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Which is beautiful.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I suppose that's why we do it. It's to break through some of those issues. And I think in campus students in in post-secondary students, there's probably a lot of perfectionism.
Yes. Procrastination and perfectionism.
The double P's.
I'm not going to start this unless I know it's going to turn out perfect.
Right. Yeah.
That's a common one, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I can totally see that. I don't remember being like that, but I probably was. It was a long time ago.
Yeah.
So Maya, how did you first get involved in art therapy, and kind of what drew you to this form of healing process?
Mm-hmm. Well, I went to art school for undergrad.
Okay.
And during that time, I took an art education course, and through that learned about art therapy. And I went to art school because I grew up with a love for art and drawing and found solace and inspiration in it. So I knew I wanted to have a career in art in some way. So art therapy stayed in my mind throughout several years working as graphic designer. And when I'd have a chance, I'd take a course or some related opportunity. Was always interested in it. So when I finally did see it fully through, I chose a post-grad diploma program in art therapy after completing an MEd in counseling psychology.
Wow.
So I then,
spent a lot of time in school.
I did it very far apart.
Yeah.
Right. So the lovely thing is during my art therapy education, we were encouraged to get back into our own art making, which for me was really different than the graphic design work I was doing. Mm-hmm. And so I rediscovered why I was drawn to it as a kid.
Nice.
So having experienced those positive effects with art myself, I like the idea of providing for clients that space and opportunity to explore, express, create, connect with art materials.
That's awesome. And if I can explore your own personal history, what is that art medium that was your favorite?
Yeah, well, growing up, I just drew a lot. Those were kind of the materials readily available. I thought I was going to be a fashion designer for a really long time.
Wow, okay.
But I eventually kind of expanded that, of course, in art school. And so actually I like mixed media. Like I like to use paint, but I like to use a lot of collage too.
Okay.
Like interestingly, how we were talking about perfectionism, it really takes a lot of practice to be like draw realistically and sort of really relay what you want on the paper.
Right.
And most of the time I'm out of practice. And so I like to kind of, I shouldn't say cheat, but I like to go to magazines and printed images. Yeah. And I feel like that's a lot quicker route for me, but it's effective.
Do you feel you might have come across some of your clients in therapy that kind of have that background in art and felt kind of more perfectionist with it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And so interestingly, and even if it's that scenario where it's already, a student who's in art or if it's someone who's just dealing with perfectionistic tendencies, then just focusing on that in the art making of like, how much can you tolerate like this, this smudging or this line being a little off and you can see that right in front of you and then you can address it right away. So
you can see working through some of that pain and overcoming some of that perfectionism.
Yeah, it's like being in that place of discomfort.
Yes,
right?
Which is kind of what we need to do to kind of progress in our mental well-being is push it a little bit and be in that discomfort.
Yeah.
Let's go to the science and creativity piece about that. So what happens in our brains when we're actually creating art, and how does it kind of help then our mental health?
Well, I know when I'm making art, I feel calmer.
Okay.
While being energized. So often in sort of that zone or flow, we say, and it's like getting a boost of happy hormones. So I am not a biology person. So I looked up all these responses I experience for clarity. And based on research evidence, there's an increase in blood flow to the reward center of the brain. So the medial prefrontal cortex during art making activities. As we know now, there is an active process, a bridge between mind and body. And so further research has shown lowered cortisol levels during art making, meaning a lowering of stress level.
Right.
And then the flow state I was talking about can be explained by increased brain wave activity in the frontal and central areas of the brain that's connected to reflective states, focused attention, and sense of pleasure.
So it's kind of like we're, in a sense, rewiring our brains in a more positive way.
Yeah, based on the research. Yeah, that's what's happening. It's unlocking these areas linked to greater mental health and wellness. So more pleasure and focus, less strain and calm, at least momentarily.
Right.
But I was thinking, imagine what being actively creative regularly, like on a regular basis, could do for mental health. And we're not just talking painting or drawing. That would extend to so many forms of expression, like writing poetry, knitting, beading, scrapbooking, decorating things. So
that's really interesting. And it's almost, in a sense, you're lowering your stress, but you're also kind of increasing that reward system in your brain, right?
Yeah.
Which, again, will help fight kind of depression and
win-win.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you see it more kind of in a sense of a mindfulness exercise then?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's a great way of looking at it too. I think that flow state is mindfulness in a way. It's the same idea of, like when we talk about athletes in their flow state and like they're fully present and focused on what they're doing in the moment, right? And that is the definition of mindfulness.
Yeah, that's exciting. I mean, it just makes sense then if we're being more mindful with our art, in a sense, and how we're processing that. It will definitely
extend
to everything else in our life. It grounds us kind of in that moment, right? So when we think about juggling kind of academic stresses and social pressures and homesickness, what does that look like with using art therapy?
I think being creative and doing art activities or some sort of expressive activity is going to, like we said, relieve stress, increase happiness, maybe in some ways. And so I think that's really important in terms of inserting that in the life of a student who has so many stressors and pressures and, like you said, homesickness. And we often kind of put those activities that we do enjoy or we recognize are stress reliefs sort of to the side when we're really busy and we feel like we need to get things done, or we're ruminating, we're missing people or things like that. So I think it's really important to be mindful of keeping that in your routine,
right? Or
seeking out activities. And at the same time, maybe you're seeking out social settings. And I mean, I don't know if there's really an answer in there or question in there.
Yeah, that's good.
But I think it's you got to be mindful of that life balance, right?
Sure.
Even as a student.
Yeah. So if I'm a student and I'm working with you in art therapy and I'm in class and I'm always stressed, are there things that I can do while I'm in class that will, kind of use art therapy to help me through that?
Doodling.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think in class, that's like a perfect example. And I know doodling is often used for people who have a lot of energy too, and then they need to sort of get that out a little bit. There can be a really soothing sort of aspect of coloring. I mean, we see a lot of adult coloring books out there and that sort of thing. Yeah. Like throw one in your bag and a bunch of markers and carry that around.
So are there any really specific type of art activities that are better suited to kind of managing anxiety or stress or depression? Is there something that works better for one or the other?
Yeah. And these could differ, right, based on whether you're just doing it on your own for yourself or if you're working with an art therapist. But I think if you're doing you're already doing art activities that make you happy and regulate you, keep doing it.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, everyone's different. And so if I'm working with someone and I'm specifically targeting symptoms of stress, anxiety, and depression in the moment, I might introduce a grounding activity that involves an art tool that has fluidity. So in art therapy, we talk about this art materials that move from resistant to fluid.
Okay.
And so if you think of like a hard tipped pencil, it's very resistant when you use it. Like you have to kind of work, but it's very controlled.
Right.
And a lot of people like that because you can really control. And then way on the other side of the spectrum would be like maybe painting with your hands or like making mud pies, right? Almost that sort of thing too, where there's not a lot of control, but there's a lot of freedom of expression.
Okay.
But a lot of people might not like that too. So anyways, getting back to that idea of grounding, I would maybe choose a tool that has fluidity to avoid that resistance so you don't get that frustration, but still is fairly easy to control. So I would say like a thick marker or pastel or maybe even watercolor with a little bit of water. And then just focusing on a soothing, repetitive motion to induce calm and regulation. So that would be like if you need to kind of ground in the moment. Right. And maybe that's something you can do in the classroom if you're sort of noticing some panic coming on or something like that, right? So this is what is called the process. Never know how to say that word.
It's one or the other. Depends on where you are.
So this is like the focus on the art making.
Right.
So in art therapy, we look at the art making and then we also look at the art as a product. Perhaps maybe the session focuses more on identifying how the anxiety or depression affects you. So maybe personifying that feeling in some way, externalizing it. So, you know, questions like the depression, do you carry it? Does it carry you? How big is it next to you? Does it encompass you? Does it look like an animal or another person, an entity with a particular color or shape, that sort of thing is sort of another type of approach. And then if the focus is more on solutions, we can look at that finished artwork a little bit more, or the product that maybe describes, for example, how the client visualizes their cycle of negative thinking and behavior, like to actually draw that out, right?
Okay. Yep.
And perhaps do some problem solving right on the page with some sort of visual intervention. So there's a lot of different approaches.
Yeah.
I just gave you a 10.
That's a lot to think about. It really is. So in a sense, there's the expressive part, which kind of makes sense. But what about, somebody who's feeling with those depressive symptoms and they're feeling like they can't do anything right? Is there certain art therapy that would be beneficial more to that? Like something that will help them accomplish more?
Yeah. I think, mastery is kind of a big one as goals in art making. So of course you want to sort of provide an art directive where you're not setting anyone up for failure. I think depending on where they're at, right? The type of material you use. So if someone just feels a lot safer cutting out pictures, right, or using different colored pieces of paper, or, sometimes I will have different colored sort of plasticines and say, make a representation of what that feels like. Right. Like just shape it with your hands and choose a color. And there's not that as much of that expectation that I have to perfect this. Right. Because we recognize like the material is not going to allow you to create some really detailed sort of thing. But like I said, the collage is a great introduction to art therapy because it doesn't feel threatening at all. You can kind of just jump in and look through magazines, really. So,
exciting way to look at it.
Yeah.
So thinking then about some of the myths and stuff about art therapy, a lot of people might think, I'm not an artist. It's really not for me to do art therapy. How do you respond to that?
Yeah. And that's a really common response. Yeah. And it's kind of jokingly made like, or I only draw stick people. Right. Yeah. So it's like, okay, well, draw stick people. That's fine. there's a quote I'll often start with some presentations with, and it's, the artist is not a special kind of person, rather each person is a special kind of artist.
Interesting. Okay.
So often we think of, like, as we were talking earlier about the perfectionism in art class or something, we often think of an artist as someone to revere with some extraordinary talent. And of course, there are a lot of famous artists have extraordinary works, but like I said before, for art therapy, the artwork is not put out there to be viewed, judged, or critiqued. It's created to make more sense of that individual's world. So if you're looking at your art and all you can do is disparage it, then maybe there's a conversation about that, because often it's an extension of something else.
A little different struggle happening there.
Yeah.
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
So in a sense, if another myth might be that art therapy might only be for those individuals then who struggle the most with their mental health. So the really severe mental health concerns.
False.
You
can just think of art therapy very much like talk therapy.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's addressing a diverse range of issues. They can be complex. They can be very common concerns. So for example, I've designed art therapy directives for stress reduction, like we were talking about, relationship dynamics, personal growth and insight, grief and loss, self-esteem. Those are all very common concerns for a lot of people.
So it's not really a sense of one size fits all in art therapy.
No,
you
not
can
at
really
all.
tailor it to
Yes.
individual issues. So are there any misconceptions about art therapy that even educators or therapists sometimes might have? It's not so much what we think of ourselves in doing art therapy, but what maybe do some educators or therapists have in those misconceptions?
There might be that idea of that since making art feels therapeutic, therefore it's art therapy, I guess.
Yeah.
For example, I talked about the adult coloring books, right? Or a therapist asking you to draw how you're feeling, or taking an art class might be labeled as art therapy. But, and these are definitely effective for like stress release or giving some form to feeling or personal satisfaction. But the official title, art therapist, belongs to someone who's been trained in the field.
Okay.
And I think that is always kind of the important thing to bring up to art educators or other therapists. And I always encourage therapists who are not trained in art to try to use some art in there if they feel like that would be helpful. Because it really can be just to, give someone a say, oh, we're talking about this. Do you want to try drawing how that feels?
Right.
Yeah, there's no harm in that.
Okay.
But I think, when you're trained in the field, you would include art as a tool for things like clinical assessment, tracking progress and change, setting goals, as well as paying attention to not just what you make, but not just what the client's making, but how they're making it. And then knowing what kind of suggestions might be helpful and ways to interact with the client and the art to sort of deepen that understanding for the client.
So if I was a new therapist out there and I think, art therapy, that's kind of just a secondary kind of therapy, what would your response be to that?
You might offend some art therapists. I mean, as an art therapist, I don't use art in every single session.
Right. Okay.
Right. Like I more commonly just do art therapy groups. And when I do use art, it might be more as a regular therapist might use it, because unless someone's looking specifically for a full art therapy session.
Right.
So I forget what the question was. What?
Or just if I was, saying that it's secondary therapy, right? Yeah.
Right.
And I don't want to offend anybody, but
no, I mean, it's the same as, art, music therapy or dance therapy or that sort of thing. Right. There's usually a corresponding response in art
Mm-hmm.
to what you might have in a regular counseling education.
So how can someone interpret the art that they create then? Should they like focus on specific shapes, colors, patterns? What would that look like?
They can't, like all of the above.
Mm-hmm.
So this is also why it can be helpful to work with an art therapist that'll ask questions to raise curiosity and venture towards some new ideas and answers for the client. But also, I think, we'll talk about it a little bit later, but there's a lot of resources
Mm-hmm.
that can kind of take you step by step through some of those questionings so that you can do it on your own as well. Yeah.
And I guess, in a sense, is it really so much about a certain color? Typically we think the color blue is
right.
Yes. It means this emotion, or the color red means this emotion. But
Yeah.
Is that always the way?
It is not always the way. I know sometimes there's a lot of assumptions, right? And myself as well. But yeah, everyone has a different take on things, right? So, and sometimes it's important to point out that when people are making their art, it doesn't always need an interpretation. I mean, sometimes they may know exactly what they're making and why, right? And so, and sometimes like a verbal conversation isn't necessary, in terms of it being therapeutic for them. But again, at times, a discussion with an art therapist can bring an additional meaning or realization for the client.
Right. So it's not necessarily finding the right answer, more kind of exploring what that might look like.
And I will spend a lot of time looking at a finished artwork with the client if they allow me to.
Okay.
Like just spend a lot of time in silence and then like just point out like I'm noticing this. And for some people, if they have enough time, they'll start kind of seeing more things in their work, which is really interesting.
That is.
Yeah.
So they're actually exploring it with you and getting more out of it than they actually thought they might.
Yeah.
Wow. So for students actually trying to do art on their own, and are there any tips for, staying present and not judging what they're doing?
Yeah, one suggestion is working to let go of attachment to the art you're creating. So just allowing yourself for exploration and experimental time of the materials, allowing for mishaps or what you deem as mishaps, crumpling and tearing paper, imperfections and that sort of thing. I think there's I've seen out there journals where it's like wreck this journal or something, and they kind of encourage you to just play around with it and mess around with it. So if you're working toward perfection, then you're losing the point of the expression through art making.
Right. So it could be, if you start finding judgment in what you're doing, you might have to take a step back.
And it's not easy, and it takes practice. I mean, I'm very judgmaital of my own art making, and just learning, to let go and not get so attached, right?
Mm-hmm. Maya, can you share a story about someone who's benefited from art therapy?
Yeah, so without giving away too many details, I worked with a student dealing with chronic pain. And much of what they were dealing with was sort of a medical mystery. They weren't getting a lot of answers, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So that was frustrating, of course, for the student because they weren't getting answers, but also they didn't necessarily have the words or the terms, labels to relay the intensity of the pain or for people to relate to how they were feeling. Yeah, just a lot of frustration. They created some art. Actually, we had talked about making art in session, but then they kind of got excited about the idea and created art outside of session and brought it in, which was great. They created like a 3D type of sculpture depicting the pain, and we just spent a lot of time just taking it all in.
Right.
So we spent the whole session just with this art piece in front of us and discussing it.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was looking at it, it was exciting for me because I could really get such a better sense of the pain that this student was going through,
Right.
just because of that visual. And then the student was able to describe the process it was making it, and then also just kind of pointed out every inch of the art and what it meant to them. And they had kind of a story to go with each part of the art. So, and they also felt a lot of pride about their craft.
Yeah.
Like how they were happy with the product, and they just were really excited about their whole process. So we talked about how the art making had increased the understanding of their experience for themselves, but also for viewers. So they had shared their art with some other people and had really positive feedback, and just this greater understanding of like, oh my gosh, that's a lot you're going through. And so the student was so excited that they were talking about the possibility of maybe starting an exhibition around chronic pain and having other people contribute. And so it's great.
Yes, kind of really cool. So they've developed that whole insight piece for themselves, and then shared that insight with others, and got real understanding out of it.
Yeah, it was serving a lot of purposes.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Have you ever had a student discover something unexpected about themselves through art therapy?
Yeah, almost always. So again, especially when we have enough time to debrief the art making, like I said, we spent that whole session just kind of looking and discussing. So I think I had mentioned earlier, it's nice that we have that third element of the art in the room, besides the client and the therapist. So you can really focus on that art. We really make meaning of what we see.
That's great. Do you think art therapy can be helpful in building connections with other people in a group setting? So thinking maybe group therapy.
Yeah, definitely. In fact, my go-to format for group settings is art therapy.
Awesome.
I love running art therapy groups. So again, the art provides this focus for people other than each other or the therapist. But of course, group, the social aspect of it is so important, right? You know, you not only can express yourself through the art, but then you have witnesses of your process, and then you can witness other people's art and, you know, provide all those things that group therapy does for you. Validation, normalization, identifying with others' stories. Yeah,
that really exemplifies all those things that group therapy is about. But then again, like you said, that third piece in there of the art, and being able to, identify, I guess, with each other with the art.
Right. And sometimes it feels safer for some people to sort of not have that direct exchange about, okay, this is what's going on for me. You know, you can focus on the art, and often I give the directive, like, you can just stay in the metaphor. Like if you've created a tree, and maybe that represents family to you in some way, you can just talk about the leaves of the tree or the roots of the tree, like, and not necessarily go into stories that maybe for some people don't necessarily feel safe.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's always good to feel more safe in therapy. What are maybe some accessible ways to incorporate creativity into students' lives?
So I think it's important to remember that creativity isn't bound by what we've been talking about in terms of visual art, art-based, those type of art-based activities. So if that's not your thing, not to feel discouraged, you know, remind yourself you're in a creative mode. If you're knitting, or if you're writing or dancing, think of create, right, in creativity. So for example, designing a video game, you're creating there. Perfecting a list of songs on Spotify or Apple. Developing a training routine in the gym. So those are all creative activities.
Right. Even I think my grandkids are doing seed art kind of thing with a board and some seeds and creating something like that. Even just you know, stones or making statues, I guess, whatever works, right? You go out into the bush and grab some stones.
That's great.
Awesome.
Environmental art.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So how can students find an art therapist?
Within Lethbridge, it's fairly limited. I'm only aware of a few certified art therapists here. And I'm not sure if there's any registered Canadian art therapists in town. That's the designation I'm working toward. There's a lot more in Calgary, if that's an option for students, but also if willing to attend art therapy virtually, then that opens up doors quite a bit. So again, if you look at the Canadian Art Therapy Association website, it will provide a list of members and their contact information. So, or come to Wellness Center and request some art therapy groups. If we know there's enough interest, then I would love to make it happen.
That's so cool. So if somebody wanted to actually incorporate art therapy into their own personal therapy with their counselor, would that be something you recommend, requesting that of a counselor? Or is that something you'd rather leave with somebody who's trained mostly in art therapy?
Yeah, I think it depends what the client is looking for. If they just recognize that they communicate better non-verbally and through art making, they can request that. Hopefully most therapists can accommodate in some way. Like they may not have supplies on hand.
Right.
But I would encourage, if clients want to make art outside of the session, bring it in and talk about it that way. I mentioned before, art therapists are specialized and have that education, but by no means does that mean other therapists can't use art in their practice.
Right.
And I think it's especially great if it's client driven.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That might even encourage more therapists to delve more into art therapy, which would be great.
Yeah.
Kind of leads into the next question on, how can someone make time for creativity when, they're already overwhelmed with school and life responsibilities and everything that's going on?
Yeah, this is always hard because creative activities can easily be put on the back burner. Oftentimes they're not deemed as important as other areas in our lives when we're busy with schoolwork or when we just have to do regular work. But oftentimes, and I would say consistently, these are the activities that bring the most enjoyment, brings relaxation, provides a break from the hard stuff. It's important. And I like to talk about segments of a pie when looking at life balance. And so sometimes the biggest piece of pie is, dedicated to school, but you can't live on that alone. So we really need, if they're just tiny slivers, little pieces of pie of creativity, and also, physical care, social, spiritual, that whole balance wheel. We need those to complete the pie.
Even if it's like that small 5 minutes during the day, just to...
Or, schedule it if you need to, right? Schedule time to devote to that wellness. And think of it that way. Thinking like, I don't have time to crochet this, even though it'd be nice to kind of sit in front of watch a show and crochet, right? Think of it more as a wellness activity that might be essential, kind of almost like a basic need.
Yeah.
And schedule that in and just say, well, I'm going to do this for half an hour. And that's it.
And sometimes just that combining of things. So taking the, like you said, crocheting while you're watching TV or combining some relaxation with some actual creativity. And that sounds great. So really it's kind of more, I guess what I'm taking is it's a quality that you put into it. Like it's quality of experience is not so much the quantity as the quality of it.
Yeah. I mean, you don't necessarily need to do something all day to get to reap the benefits of it. Yeah. Maybe you just need a little break, and then you get back into whatever textbook looking at,
exactly.
Right? So,
between your naps of textbook reading, right?
Right.
Maya, so where can listeners learn more about art therapy or find examples of creative exercises they can do at home?
There's some great resources. A lot is on social media.
Okay.
So I mentioned CATA, Canadian Art Therapy Association. That might be a good place to start again and discover some links. Instagram has a lot of art therapist accounts. And if you Google art therapy or art activities, there's hundreds of sites that pop up, including links to books and art cards, art therapy card ideas that you can purchase. one well-known art therapist I can think of who has a wide range of books and videos that include a lot of art activities that sometimes I use as well is Kathy Melchiotti.
Okay.
So remember that name if you're interested.
Kathy Melchiotti.
Yeah.
And websites, I'm sure Instagram and all the...
Yeah, I'm
stuff.
sure. Like
Okay.
she's a veteran, but she must have a really good social media person.
Okay.
When I say veteran, that's a kind way. I mean, she's a little older.
She's not old, is she? No, okay. We're not saying that.
But she's got her finger on the pulse.
Right,
so.
yeah. She's our pioneer.
Yeah.
Our pioneer.
Thank you. Pioneer.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and like we try to, here at Lethbridge Polytechnic, we try to provide opportunities to do art activities. We have a crafts and connection group. You might see other student groups setting up activities to do, which we're seeing a lot more of, which I love. There's this organization called Art Hives, which originated in Eastern Canada. And now they're like, you can find art hives throughout the world. And they use that term, art hives. And they can be permanent locations or they can be pop-up locations. And it's just community art making. Like you just provide the supplies and people show up. So actually, we have that here.
Oh.
You know, every once in a while, someone's setting up a table where there's just art and you can just stop by and make what you want.
Yeah. So you can basically stop by, make something quality-wise in relation to what you're feeling and take it to your therapist, and there you go.
Yeah.
That's awesome. This is great resources out there for it. So art therapy, I guess, in a sense, we're just, like you said, talking about creativity, and that could be a number of different things. So
yes, for sure.
A shameless plug, though, I guess, Dungeons and Dragons therapy we're trying to look at. So in a sense,
that's great.
That is creativity and art.
Yes, it is.
Right? So we'll see how that turns out. Maya, any final words to our listeners?
Just that art is for everyone. And I think we need to put it on a T-shirt.
Okay. We'll do that in Wellness Services here.
Okay.
Art is for everyone.
Art is for everyone.
Excellent.
Yes.
Well, thanks, Maya, for everything that you've brought to us. We really appreciate all the information and learning about art therapy. I will definitely encourage any of the students I come across to look at art therapy as a real viable sense of, finding out who they are and getting some insight into what they're feeling and how they're processing student life.
Yeah.
Remember, listeners, it's really not about the art you create. It's about the journey you take when creating it. So we hope today's episode inspires you to pick up a pen or a paintbrush or some old magazines and just explore creativity, how it can support your mental health. And whether, like I said, it's 5 minutes a day doodling or, getting into a real big art project, every little bit does count. So if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to hit the subscribe button and just so you don't miss any further episodes, we have great ideas coming up, insights and inspirations for thriving on campus. And share this episode with a friend who might need a little creative boost in their life right now. Together, we can build a community that prioritizes mental health and well-being. So, reminder of the week, your creative spark is already within you. Light it up, let it shine. Don't forget, no matter how messy or imperfect life feels, your well-being is worth the effort. So thanks for tuning in. Until next time, keep creating, keep thriving, and keep fearless.